Hey, Inspired Moneymaker. Worried about layoffs, a broken appliance, or natural disaster? Today's guest says having multiple emergency funds could be the financial first aid you need. Episode 243 features Alyssa Davies, financial blogger, author, podcaster.
You don't have to have a 9-to-5 if that's not what you want. You don't have to have kids if that's not what you want. You don't have to get married. You don't have to buy a house. Those are all choices you can make, and some of them might not be the right choices for you. But if they are, then you have to have patience, because yes, it's scary right now, but things will change. Again, the economy shifts so often. It's a cycle. And so there'll be waves of things being very expensive, but there'll be times when it's a little bit more affordable, just like your salary. Sometimes it'll be really great, and sometimes it'll be really bad. But that's part of your money, and that's part of learning to adjust.
I'm Andy Wong, host of the Inspired Money podcast, where we share positive perspectives on money so we can have a bigger impact in our community and the world. This episode is brought to you by my company, Runnymede Capital Management. If you need help with financial planning, your investments, or setting up a 401k retirement plan for your business, schedule a call with me at inspiredmoney.fm/call. That's inspiredmoney.fm/CALL. We're fee-only, family-owned, and provide objective advice. Schedule a no-obligation call today. Inflation is reducing our purchasing power. Mortgage rates are up. The stock market is down in 2022. There are lots of things to worry about. So we've got the founder of the popular finance blog Mixed Up Money on the show. Alyssa's going to talk about her new book, Financial First Aid, Essential Tools for Confident, Secure Money Management. For background, Alyssa changed every aspect of her financial life and went from being $13,000 in debt to saving $20,000 in just 2 years. In this episode, you'll learn about tracking, budgeting, and sound money principles. When mental health is your biggest unexpected expense. And make sure you tune into the end to hear about tracking your emotions in a journal to better understand your spending. Now let's get inspired with Alyssa Davies. Alyssa, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's great to chat.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
It's such a good question. I was actually just chatting about this with a friend recently, and we were discussing kind of the first moments of when you go to your friend's house for maybe the first time, or a neighbor's house for the first time, and you see the differences, whether it be in what the house looks like, what kind of food they eat, how the parents spend money when you're out with your friends. All of those kind of things are really what tend to be the first things I think of as early money memories, is the comparisons, like how quickly you start that feeling of, am I like everyone else? And are we doing the same things as everyone else?
I'm wondering if that kind of points back to you becoming like the person that you were, the child that you were, visiting people and noticing those things. Did that play into you becoming a personal finance blogger and now an author?
It could have something to do with it. I think I felt a lot of pressure immediately, like money. I knew that it wasn't something you spoke about openly with strangers, but I didn't really realize how differently we all use it because there wasn't a lot of worry in my house. So I think when I started to see that other people were facing difficulty or different experiences was when I realized how unique money can be.
Tell us a little bit about your blog and what it's like to go from blogger to authoring a book.
Oh man, it's quite the jump. I've always loved writing, and that's what I went to university for, was journalism. So blogging was a natural fit. It was something fun that was a passion. And when I started blogging about money, because I was trying to hold myself accountable during debt repayment, I just fell in love with the community and started to get so interested in learning about finance because it was never ending. Like, I'm still always learning and evolving my opinions and thoughts on money and how to use money and how to invest my money. And when the opportunity arose to write a book, it was like, well, yes, obviously this is a dream, so I have to do it. But also, it was a heavy ask because it's much more than like 1,000-word blog post. But also, I got to actually put together a guide for people that were struggling that I can't do with a blog. It's something that you can't carry with you and kind of have that tangible look at what you might need.
Well, congratulations on the release of Financial First Aid Kit. I'm sure that's very exciting.
Thanks. Yeah, it was so exciting. This is my second book. My first one I didn't even get to celebrate because it was peak pandemic when it came out. And this time it actually felt like I had an opportunity to embrace the moment of doing something so big.
So I noticed in the opening of the book, or pretty early, you kind of describe your upbringing, and it sounded like things were pretty comfortable. Can you talk a little bit about, because you said that instead of feeling fortunate for your upbringing, you had some feelings of shame.
Yeah, I still feel that way. I think I didn't realize how much privilege impacts the way that you grow with money, your ability to make wealth, your ability to get certain jobs. And so I feel a lot of guilt around that. And it's something that I'm working through in a course that I'm taking right now called Trauma of Money, because a lot of us don't recognize that. A lot of us don't see money as being different for every single person. And I think that it's a really good conversation to have and a good way to open up I might not be able to resonate with you in the way that you would with someone else because I might not have lived the same experience as you. And a lot of financial experts can't give you everything you need. So you have to take bits and pieces of that information and kind of mold them to what works with your lifestyle.
In your building, your community, like, have you been able to leverage that to get more perspectives from people of different backgrounds, of, you know, like, that you can get different views on money?
Absolutely. I interviewed so many amazing people that have very unique backgrounds, completely different from mine, and I use my community as a tool so that everyone can win. Like I do weekly polls on my Instagram actually, and we kind of crowdsource what people's retirement plans look like. How much do you have invested? How old are you? What's your salary? And what industry do you work in? And I share that all anonymously so that people can feel like they have more knowledge about what life looks like for other people, because it's something that's so interesting to all of us. Like, what do other people look like? What is their life like? And can they actually afford their life? That's what so many of us really want to know.
So talk a little bit more about the importance of opening one's eyes to other people's experiences, and maybe share like a shocker that opened your eyes in a big way.
For sure. One thing that I think a lot of us need to realize is that how privilege actually does afford you opportunities that other people will never be afforded. So whether it be your skin color, your gender, if you grew up in poverty or not, those things all greatly impact your money. If your parents, there's statistics that say if your parents owned a home, you're more likely to own a home. So everything about our childhood dictates how we use money in the future. And it's something that not a lot of people recognize. I myself did not understand how heavy poverty can be for people. I didn't realize that if you grew up in poverty, you're very likely to stay in that cycle. It's really difficult to break out of that cycle because you are so used to having this fear or feeling of never having enough. And that's something that takes a lot of time to work through, let alone having the tools you need to actually do things with your money and have tangible actions you can take.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I mean, socioeconomic challenges gets very complex because you're talking about mindset, but I think that there's very concrete evidence that shows that if you're in a poorer neighborhood, your schools aren't as good. Your school's not able to draw as good teachers, and therefore your opportunities are just not the same.
Yes, so many people forget about network and location and how much that impacts us. Like people will be like, well, I worked just as hard to get that job as someone else, but fail to acknowledge that maybe they had a relative that works at the company that helped them, you know? So it's a good thing to do is just say, like, be upfront about what your privilege is so that people can know whether or not they can actually rely on you for the advice that they need. Because there's so many opportunities and there's so many great people in finance right now that you don't have to rely on one person for all of the knowledge that you gain.
Alyssa, tell us a little bit about your story, because I know that you went from $13,000 in debt to saving 20,000 in 2 years. Walk us through, how can people save their first $10,000?
Oh, it's such a good question. I feel like for me, I put all of my energy into paying off my debt. There are some things that, knowing what I know now, I would do differently, but it worked. I went on a complete spending freeze. I didn't spend any money on anything other than essentials, and I put all of my extra income that I had towards my debt. And that afforded me the opportunity to pay it off extremely quickly. But I also didn't have a ton of responsibility and a ton of expenses at that time in my life. I was in my early 20s, whereas if I was in the position I am now with kids and a house, it wouldn't be that quick and it wouldn't be that easy. So it totally depends on your lifestyle, but one of the best ways that you can change your life and earn more towards your savings is to earn more income and negotiating your salary and negotiating your bills and taking the time to have those really uncomfortable conversations that we might not want to have. But those are the things that are going to make a bigger impact on your bottom line than, say, cutting out the things that actually make you happy, like going for dinner with your friends every week.
So did you do all of the above? I mean, it sounds like it is two-sided. You said that you had a spending freeze, so you have to slow down the spending. And then on the flip side, you also have to figure out how to make more. Were you doing all of those things?
Yes, I did all of those things. I actually learned immediately how valuable multiple streams of income are, and that having a side hustle, for instance, was going to change the game for me because I wasn't able to earn more income at my full time position, even after attempting negotiation. There wasn't room for that at the time. And just learning to invest and learning to save and how those things can actually be really valuable in providing me with financial security. So I did all of it. I called every single provider, every single lender. I asked people to lower the interest rates on my credit card. I was willing to do anything I could to get ahead faster.
Because you slow down the bleeding, so to speak. Like, your debt is not growing on you. You're trying to slow that down. On the multiple streams of income, so you had a day job, what kind of things could you do to generate multiple streams?
So I started investing, which is an easy, accessible way for you to start growing an income if you have extra money that you can put towards that. That is one stream of income right there. I had my money put in a high interest savings account. That's a really small amount right now given our economy, but it counts as a stream of income. And I actually started to do my side hustle with my blog. I used that as a tool and I started freelance writing, which was really flexible way for me to earn money. And also I was able to choose how much time I could put towards that. And then something small I did was actually I did sports statistics at college sports games. So that was just a fun way to make more money.
Oh, that's cool. Like, how long did it take for your blog to actually generate meaningful income?
It's taken me quite a while. At the beginning, I was doing a ton of cold pitching out to companies to say, hey, here's some topics I can write about. Here's my rate, which was very low because I did not know how much I could be charging or what I should be charging. And I would say the first year I made about $1,000. It wasn't very much, but it was enough to feel like there is potential here. And now I'm able to bring in, you know, 5 figures of additional income every single month. And that's such a good feeling because I have built this network that now I no longer have to do the cold pitching or the asking other people for support. They were just coming to me. And so it took 5 solid years, I would say, to get a consistent income.
And I understand today you're the breadwinner in your family.
Yes, I am the higher income earner, and my husband is actually on parental leave right now, which is a really amazing opportunity for both of us because I don't miss out on that year of potential earning, and he gets an opportunity to spend time with our kids that he normally wouldn't have the opportunity to do.
When you paid off your debt and started saving, were you married already or were you single and doing that on your own?
One of the things that actually led me to pay off my debt was that my boyfriend at the time, now husband, proposed to me. And I quickly realized there's no way I can afford to pay for a wedding with all of this debt. And I don't want to enter a marriage with this debt. So we gave ourselves 2 years to prepare for the wedding. So I paid off my debt in 1 year. And then the next year, we saved enough together to pay for our wedding in full.
Wow, congrats. It's a good start to a relationship.
Yes, definitely. And we had a lot of uncomfortable conversations at the beginning of our relationship about money and how we were both feeling about it. And now it's something we love doing and we chat about regularly. And it actually is exciting, which I don't think a lot of people would say the same.
Well, you are a personal finance expert, so you should be having those conversations.
Yes, I always joke I use spreadsheets for fun. It's my party trick, I guess.
So you paid off your debt, you saved up enough money to have like a war chest, you could pay for your wedding. When do you start putting money into emergency funds? And I wanted to get into that because I think you have some unique approaches there because it's not just one emergency fund.
Yes. And I think a lot of people will be like, why would I ever need more than one emergency fund? I don't want to leave any money on the sidelines. My money all has to be working for me. And I completely agree. So I'll preface that before anyone hops off thinking I'm not going to be able to give them something new to take away with this. But I think this is the one thing I would have changed about my life when I was doing my debt repayment is I would have saved for an emergency fund at the same time. I would have saved for that buffer so that I never had anything derail my progress with debt repayment because there were times when I did have something come up, which we all do, things we cannot control, that made me have to step back and not be able to put as much towards my debt. And it wasn't a very big amount, but it could be enough for some people to not be able to even pay the minimums on their debt. So having that emergency fund while you're paying off your debt is extremely important. So I like people to know that. I know it can feel overwhelming because every expert you know will say you need 3 to 6 months of expenses for your emergency fund. And that sounds like a lot of money. And it is. But everyone's starting with $0 in their emergency fund. And I, at the start, just put $20 a week into my emergency fund. I had an automatic withdrawal come out every Saturday because that's when I would spend money on the weekend with my friends. So I was like, I won't even notice. And I didn't. And I still have the same automatic withdrawal coming out every single week to this day because it's a small amount, it's manageable, and it constantly refills that fund and gives me permission to spend it when emergencies do happen.
Are you putting that in its own account, like a separate
Yes.
account?
Yes. And that is exactly why I have multiple emergency funds too. I like to compartmentalize my financial goals. I do this because I have high functioning anxiety. And so thinking about spending money that I've saved for something terrifies me. And when I just had one emergency fund that I was supposed to spend on anything that could go wrong, it felt really overwhelming and I didn't know what an actual emergency was. So I wasn't using this money I'd saved. And so I started to split things up so that I had labels and so that I was more aware of when to spend the money. So I have one account that's for me, that protects me in my relationship and in my work, and a second one that is for my family to protect us from any potential job loss, from medical emergencies, or anything terrible that could happen to our family. And the last one is one for my shelter to protect the four walls around us.
Now, the Protecting Yourself Fund is also known as the F Off Fund.
Yes. It's one of my favorite. I mention Paulette Perhat in the book because I absolutely love this fund. And I talk about it constantly with everyone I know, every woman in my life. I'm like, you need this fund in your relationship. You may not think you need it, but you do. And a lot of people scoff because they think their relationship is perfect and they'll never be in a situation where they would need their own money.
So is the financial first aid kit like, is this a book that you kind of wrote for your younger self, or is it the culmination of your experiences so that you can help people to get on the right footing with their money?
I think in part it is for my younger self as like a method of healing from all of the things that I used to worry about that don't bother me anymore. But it's definitely for anyone who has that financial anxiety that they can't kick of like, what's going to happen? I have people messaging me all the time, like, what's going to happen with climate change? Am I going to have enough when I hit retirement age? How can I protect myself in my relationship? I don't feel like I have any independence. Those are all things that you can control to a certain extent. But it's learning what actions you need to take and how much money you need to save to give yourself that security and that power back.
For you, you love spreadsheets. So it sounds like you kind of map out a lot of these. It's like your worries, and then you can spreadsheet and figure out, okay, if something happens, I'll be okay. Do you have to change those numbers frequently? Because you're forecasting, right? Like you're kind of guessing. You don't always know for sure, and I'm sure it's like a very dynamic document.
Yes, absolutely. It's like your budget. Like every few months, something will change, or maybe you'll have a more expensive month. You need to reassess and you need to switch things around. And I think that's a good thing to do, is to just check in every 1 to 3 months and say, you know, am I still on track? Is everything going okay? If you don't want to be that person that has to track their spending every single day and write down every dollar they spend, I get it. But you still need to check in with your money and shift and adjust as life goes. Because, yeah, today I might own a home, but maybe next year we decide we're going to sell it and travel the world. So I wouldn't need this fund. I might need a different fund that protects me from potential dangers when I'm traveling. So I think it's all about kind of giving yourself the opportunity to know what could happen and being aware that that can change.
You've mentioned the word anxiety several times. So it sounds like you're thinking a lot about what ifs. Like, what if different things can happen? What if somebody is more like happy-go-lucky type of personality? What advice do you give them for, like, are there categories of things that they need to be thinking about and setting aside for those rainy days?
Yes, you're really calling me out on the anxiety. I switched my thinking when someone told me, you know, it's not a bad thing. You have all of the preparedness that you should have. And I think I would tell someone who's an optimist that, first of all, I wish I was you, because that sounds like a dream. And secondly, you know, I know that a lot of us never want to admit that the worst thing can happen in life. And I don't want people to walk through their day with like a thundercloud over their head, constantly worried about the what ifs. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that those things exist, because a lot of them are unplanned, but some of them are also, those are planned expenses. If you own a home, it's inevitable that you'll have to repair your roof every 10 years. And so if you're not giving yourself the stamina or the money to save and actually prepare for that, you're setting yourself up for failure.
So this month, May, we're recording this, is Mental Health Awareness Month. And you wrote about, so far, your most significant medical emergency has been your mental health. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I still get like taken back when I speak about this, because I wrote in the book even, like, I'd never thought I would put this in such a permanent place. But I actually dealt with depression and suicidal thoughts, which is not an easy thing to admit, because there's still a lot of shame that exists around mental health. And I wanted to share so that people feel more comfortable and understanding in knowing that those things actually do impact your money, whether you want to believe it or not. And so I spoke about, you know, how unaffordable things like therapy are, how much that matters and it's worth the cost, yet it takes a lot of justifying for most people because it means having to give up something else in your budget. And if you're barely scraping by, you really have to consider, what your options are. So I spoke a lot about that because I think for me, I've realized over the past several years how much money and your mental health are connected and how much giving yourself peace of mind and confidence can dramatically change your life. Like I say now, because I have these emergency funds and because I'm prepared for every potential emergency, I no longer worry about my money. I still have worry because anxiety is a lifelong thing that I have to deal with, but I don't worry about what would happen if I lost my job tomorrow. It's just not something that takes up space in my mind anymore, and I'm so thankful for that. And I want other people to feel that too.
I think there are many surveys, and oftentimes money is listed as the number one stressor for people. But I feel like when it comes to the relationship between mental health and money, oftentimes I feel like that's not spoken about that openly. Like, in your experience, what kind of relationship do you see there?
I see a massive relationship. I think that we all have some sort of money trauma, whether we realize it or not. I think that how we grew up, we've spoken about poverty and we've spoken about, when your parents have to hold back, but we all have these, like Ramit Sethi talks about them. We all have these invisible money scripts. People would tell you things about money when you were growing up, and those are things that you'll regurgitate or that stick with you for the rest of your life. So if someone was constantly saying, you have to work hard, you're not allowed to rest, then that is going to be what you grow up doing and what you grow up knowing. And so right there, that's your relationship with money. And that can take a toll on your mental health.
I want to ask you about paying off debt again, since we kind of went down the path of multiple streams of income. But on the freezing your expenses and trying to negotiate, what was your approach? Was it Snowball or Avalanche? Maybe you can define those and explain what your approach was. What worked for you?
Yeah, so one option is to pay off the debt with the highest interest first, and that's what I did. It made the most sense for me to tackle my credit card debt first because the interest rates are extremely high. And then I tackled my student loans last because they had a really low and attainable interest rate. It wasn't as overwhelming. Another option, though, is to just tackle all of them at the same time, whichever one you feel you need to pay, but just the minimum balance on all of those accounts. And I felt like personally I could get ahead faster if I was tackling the highest interest rate because the minimum payment was never going to be enough to get ahead. And so that was definitely a strategy that I had in mind. But one strategy that a lot of people don't talk about too is, because we've been talking about mental health and all of that, what debt is weighing on you the heaviest? Maybe you have a loan from a family member that you just can't shake, it's stressing you out and you're feeling really guilty about it. That's a debt that I would focus on first. And I think it's okay to prioritize things that are really causing you a lot of stress.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I know that you talked about how emotions can play into financial emergencies, but I never thought about the emotional connection to trying to prioritize what debt do you pay down first.
Yes, for sure. Everything that we do with money, how you spend and how you save, all has to do with your emotions. I completely believe that. And I wish that it was spoken about more openly.
Well, speaking for myself, and probably a lot of guys to generalize, not too good about identifying my own emotions and then acting I just I don't face it enough. I probably just
No,
don't address it enough to even know how to then prioritize my actions.
no, I can actually relate. When I first went into therapy, my therapist said to me, "You're really good with anger, but the rest of your emotions could really use some work." I had no idea. I was like, that's the only thing I feel. I don't feel anything else. I never felt excited about anything. That was something I couldn't say out loud because it felt too weird to me to be excited about something, which sounds so silly. But I actually started tracking my emotions in a journal. And I started to write down how I was feeling that day. And then I would write down how much I spent that day. And I would see if there was any correlation in what was triggering me to spend money that day. And that's how I started to understand my behaviors and my relationship with money.
So for you, did you have spending that was emotional? Like, were you spending to make yourself feel better?
Oh, always. I still sometimes do that. I still do order things for the anticipation of something coming in the mail. I don't even know if I want the item. It's just like, oh, it's so exciting to have something that's coming that's new. And so I think we all kind of do that. I also used to spend a lot just to make other people think differently of me. I would shop every Friday before the weekend came so that I had a new outfit to impress my friends or my peers. And I don't do that anymore. I refuse to buy things just to make other people happy. Now my priority is what's going to make me happy.
That is a big and important shift. And I think you mentioned a little bit about that in your book because you talk about your husband having this kind of realization that he was starting to see money differently.
Yeah. We were both realizing that it didn't matter what vehicles other people were driving or what clothes they wore because we don't actually know if they can afford that lifestyle. And does it actually matter what they own and what they wear if we don't connect with them on a personal level? Like those things really started to matter in a different way to us once we started to grasp what money really meant.
I want to ask you about your journal, your emotional journal again. Because for you, anger, at least like that's a start, right? Like you know that, okay, I can express anger pretty well. So that can be my gateway to my other emotions. Have you been able to develop expression of like happiness or excitement? Like, has that changed for you?
Yes, my husband freaked out a couple of months ago when I said I was excited for this book. He thought I was joking because I have never, like, he's always like, are you excited? Are you excited? Before Christmas, before a vacation. And I'm like, no, I'll be excited once we're there, like, once it's happening. I can't, the anticipation, it's just not a thing for me. And when I said those words out loud, even I was like, whoa, I'm actually feeling excited. And I sat in that moment for a second and just let myself be excited. Normally I would brush it off and be like, yeah, okay, what am I excited? Cool. But this time I actually sat with it. And so I'm starting to just like label and be aware of how I'm feeling, which sounds kind of silly. Like I still feel weird when I tell people that, but it takes a lot of practice to give yourself the opportunity to feel certain feelings.
I'm super curious about that because I have three kids, and my oldest daughter, I would say, is like, the most even and not emotional one. And then my youngest daughter is very emotional, very expressive. Like if somebody is going to be in theater and on the stage, it's the youngest one. And then my son, who's in the middle, is sort of in the middle. Like sometimes he gets really excited, but he's not like his youngest sister. And yeah, so I'm curious, maybe my oldest daughter needs to start a emotion journal because we want her to
No,
develop, right? It's like, how do
yeah.
you
And
express yourself?
right, and those are things we don't know when we're little. Like I work on that with my daughter too. I'm like, we have to say explicitly say like I feel sad so that she knows what that feels like because I didn't get those lessons when I was younger. And had I gotten them, I might have been able to do that stuff sooner and recognize how I was feeling earlier and more often.
Well, and as a parent, where we are trying to sort of guide our kids with my oldest, who's like even tempered, and I'm like, that can be a strength and a weakness. I feel like she could be in a job, like she could be a trauma doctor and be able to operate without getting super excited. But at the same time, we want to develop empathy in her
Yes.
so that,
Right.
like she has those emotions and she feels those emotions for other people.
Yes, totally. And I agree. It's a strength and a weakness. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have it as a weakness either. I think it's just more learning as you go. And sometimes it takes big things to kind of have that shift happen in your mind.
So as you've been more like cognizant and conscious of your emotions, like talk a little bit about how has that tied back to money?
For me, it's still, like I said, learning every day. growing every day. Like, I will never be the financial person that comes to you and says I'm perfect and that I don't make mistakes. I don't think that's possible. I think even the wealthiest of the wealthy still make mistakes with their money. And I think it's learning to accept that you don't have to feel shame for those mistakes and that you don't have to be embarrassed, because it's almost unavoidable. Like, as consumers, we will eventually feel that need to like just go buy takeout, and that's okay. Like, it's not going to drastically impact your retirement, that one meal. And so I think it's about learning balance for sure, and just accepting that you don't have to be 100% with your money all the time.
Well, I find that our money, like moderation with our money, is similarly with exercise and diet. Like, moderation's good. You don't want to
Yes.
be miserly and never spending anything. Like, you do have to enjoy life a little bit too.
Yeah, and that's so true. Like, exercise for me, I used to do it for like to look good. Now I'm doing it just to like feel good. And I think that's how it is with money too. I used to do it because I knew that's what I had to do. Now I do it because that's what I want to do.
So, Alyssa, you think about money a lot. So I wanted to ask you, uh, here's a quote from your book. Money can't take away your pain and suffering. It cannot love us. Like, you were talking about, like, I wanted to ask you, like, how do you define money? How do you view money?
I think I view money as a tool, just like I view time as a tool. They're assets for sure, but you have to learn how to use them in a way that's best for you. Like, money can be a tool to give you happiness if that's what you need, or it can be a tool to provide you with the security, which is something that I always look for. And it's all about, again, the balance in knowing what you want and how to use the tools.
I'm curious about some of the polls that you do on Instagram. I mean, it must be fascinating to get that, one, the engagement, but the interaction and feedback from people that you don't know. Of course, I guess as you build a community, you get to know people. But can you talk a little bit about the different ways you think about money when you don't have it versus when you do have it?
Oh, yeah. That one definitely comes down to scarcity. And I think that's a part of our society and how we have created this illusion of what money is, which is that you'll never have enough. It doesn't matter what your life looks like or how much is in your bank account. You probably always feel like you'll never have enough. It's kind of like time. Like, I'm constantly feeling this scarcity with time. Like, I have so much on my to-do list and there's no way I'm going to get it all done. But in reality, it's like, that's the truth. You will never get it all done. And it may not ever feel like you're going to have enough. So learning to actually put something more realistic down is important. I asked one time in my polls, I said, like, what amount of money would actually make you feel comfortable? Like, you never had to worry anymore. And so many people's immediate reaction was, well, millions of dollars. Like, there'll never be enough. And I'm like, no, you need to seriously sit down and ask yourself, like, how much money would it take for me to feel like I don't have to worry? There has to be a real number out there. Like, you have to sit down and look at how much you earn and how much you spend and say, like, it's $30,000. That's how much I would need in my bank account so that if something bad happened tomorrow, I'd feel okay. And if it's $1 million, fine. It's $1 million and you can start working towards that. But a realistic number that can give you that peace of mind.
Talking about realistic numbers, what do you say to people who feel like today is different than their parents' generation? That homes are so expensive, that college tuition's so expensive, that they feel like it's impossible, like they'll never be able to retire.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really scary right now. I think it's okay to say, like, inflation is bad and house prices are skyrocketing. Like, it's out of control and it feels like, yeah, it's really hard to break into the real estate market right now. It's really hard to buy your groceries and like your budget's constantly evolving. I've had to recheck my budget 4 times this year to make sure that I'm on track with my grocery spending because I find that the prices are rising so rapidly. And one thing that I just also like to acknowledge though is like, yes, all of these things are happening and it's overwhelming. But like another thing that's happening is like life is changing and a lot of the traditional milestones that we used to have in place when our parents were growing up or that they thought that maybe we were supposed to be doing, they don't have to be. Like you don't have to do the traditional life that has been set forth for you. You don't have to have a 9 to 5 if that's not what you want. You don't have to have kids if that's not what you want. You don't have to get married. You don't have to buy a house. Those are all choices you can make. And some of them might not be the right choices for you. But if they are, then you have to have patience because yes, it's scary right now, but things will change again. The economy shifts so often. It's a cycle. And so there'll be waves of things being very expensive, but there'll be times when it's a little bit more affordable, just like your salary. Sometimes it'll be really great and sometimes it'll be really bad, but that's part of your money and that's part of learning to adjust.
It is pretty amazing. I mean, the possibilities are vast today, since we know that there are digital nomads who move to Bali and can then suddenly have like a much lower cost of living, but then they can work remotely for, companies in the USA or Canada, and they're doing pretty well. But it's a very different way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's the coolest part is like we definitely live in a gig economy. You don't have to do everything the same as someone else. And like if you're comfortable with that, living on a roller coaster income or moving to a different country so that your cost of living is lower, go for it. Like why not? Especially if you're young. There's time for you to like explore and experience those different ways to make money. And that's something I've learned a lot recently too is like there are endless ways to make money.
I love that you're very open to admitting that you make financial mistakes. I'm a financial advisor. Similarly, I make plenty of financial mistakes. How do you deal with financial regret?
That's a tough one. Regret is something I think a lot of us struggle with. A lot of us especially feel like we bought something we never should have bought because it doesn't serve us in the way that we thought we should. Um, I'm one to think that if it happened, and you can't change the past. So I don't like to dwell too much on those mistakes. Instead, I like to learn from them. And sometimes it takes me 2 or 3 times before I actually learn. But I think that those are lessons that can be really valuable if you give yourself the time to reflect. I also think that like when we're buying things, it's okay to just sit in it for a minute. Like, why am I buying this? And use time as a tool to like make sure you really want it to avoid that financial regret as well.
Time is important. Yeah. You kind of realize things if you're not rushing.
Yes. Which we all do because of that time scarcity piece. We all think like, oh, I have to get it now or it won't be here tomorrow. It'll still be here. It's okay.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a salesperson whose job it is to create that urgency. Like, you need this now. We're like, oh my gosh.
Yes, we're always being sold something.
Well, thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences. I like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
That's a good question. I think I define success as like doing the things that make you happy and not doing what external sources tell you is what should make you happy. Whether that be working a job that doesn't actually provide you with any fulfillment, or yeah, buying a home just because your parents told you it was a good investment might not be the investment for you. I think we need to refigure what success really looks like for each individual person rather than trying to have like this collective idea of success.
I know it gets so hard because society kind of defines these things. And then you find yourself like, wait a minute, is that something that's important to me? Or is that being like pushed upon me?
Yes, tradition versus like what is life like today? Because it's shifted so much in the past decade.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Tell the Inspired Money listeners and viewers where they can read your blog, read your book, and follow you.
For sure. You can head to mixedupmoney.com to get any of my blog posts or free resources that I have there. You can follow me on any social media platform at Mixed Up Money, and you can pick up Financial First Aid at any major book retailer.
I love the name Mixed Up Money.
Thanks, it just rolls off the tongue.
It does. Thanks so much, Alyssa.
Thanks for having me.
What was your favorite inspired money moment? I like the idea of checking in with your money and budget regularly. Make updates as things are always changing. A war in Ukraine, rising cost of groceries. I also like the idea of journaling your emotions, especially if you think you make emotional purchases. Give it a try and let me know if it helps. If you had a different favorite inspired money moment, please post a comment or share it in the Inspired Moneymakers Facebook group at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. Thanks for tuning in to the end. Be sure to subscribe to my email that goes out every 2 weeks. It's investment focused, and the Runnymede investment team highlights data, news, and events that we think are worth sharing. Subscribe at inspiredmoney.fm/newsletter. Thank you for joining me on this mission. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.